Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Welcome to the Passive Investing Made Simple podcast. I am your host this week, Rob Gallo. Some of you know me. I'm the Director of Investor Relations here at PassiveInvesting.com. Whitney is taking some well-deserved time off this week, so we wish her all a happy spring break. Again, I'm glad everyone's here. We've got about 10 people here. We're about 3 minutes past the hour. So why don't we actually kick into the presentation here? I'm really happy to provide you with how to maximize your inheritance on 6 essential steps for managing sudden wealth. Before we actually get into that presentation, I do want to remind everyone that if you like what we do on this podcast of Passive Investing Made Simple, please make sure you visit passiveinvestingwithwhitney.com. Whitney has put up a bunch of tools and tips and tricks in terms of how you can underwrite your next deal. You can also learn about our next deals here at passiveinvesting.com, and you can book a one-on-one meeting with the guru herself, Whitney, to learn everything that she has to share. So with that, why don't we actually go ahead and kick in to this topic. First and foremost, this is a framework to help you think through when you inherit money. This actually could be multiple cases that this framework could work through. It could be not only just inheritance, but if you do receive a windfall of cash or some stock or something like that from any of those situations. I'm going to be using a personal case in my instance to explain some of these pieces that help me think through this. But again, you can use these same principles to talk through any type of windfall, like winning the lottery, if you were so fortunate to do that. I do want to say I am not an accountant. I'm not an attorney or a wealth manager. When I was in the position of receiving some inheritance, I definitely used Google as my best friend to double check, triple check everything that an accountant or the attorney were informing us about. But I do want to make sure that if you're in this situation, please consult with a professional for advice. So in terms of the agenda today, we'll go through the introduction, which we just basically did. We'll talk through the 6 essential steps, and I'll provide you some examples, and then we'll just summarize and then take some questions from there. Just quickly about me, I'm the Director of Investor Relations. I kind of talked about that a little bit already at PassiveInvesting.com. Previously, this is actually my second career. I was a consultant for 18 years. I've been an active and passive investor for 12 years, and really was fortunate enough to inherit some cash, stocks, and a non-working farm from my grandparents. So my 3 siblings and myself, that happened to us several years back. I'm married with 2 kids. That's a picture of my beautiful wife there, and my son Hayden and my daughter Sienna. So let's kick in terms of what these essentials are. So again, like I explained, however you received your money, you can use these principles across all these categories. And I will be talking to this from inheriting money as what happened to me. So the first step when you inherit money or experience some kind of windfall, take a breath. If it is an inheritance, maybe you just lost something in your family, or even had just a large life event that occurred to you. Nothing needs to be done overnight. I used to work in the healthcare space and consulting, and we used to joke around that, well, if you don't make that timeline or anything, no one's going to die from it. However, in some of those cases, yes, they were going to, but in reality, when this occurs, just take a breath and take a second to realize kind of what you've received, what you have. And it also allows you to understand for that next step in the path, giving yourself some time to really think before you move. The next topic that we have on this one is have a holding plan before you do move forward. So as I said, you want to take a breath, make sure that you're saving some time for you to really think through what you're doing. But in the meantime, if you do receive cash or anything like that, you don't want necessarily the cash to sit there, right? You want to be looking at a place where you can actually have that cash, earn some interest, and while you're putting a plan together for either, you know, investments or other pieces, but you want to have a plan to actually hold that money. I wish that at the time that this occurred to me, I had access to the passive investing debt fund, because I could have earned 8% on that money while it sat there and while we figured out what it was. But to to that issue, I was accessing a high yield savings account that wasn't that much at that time. But please have a holding plan so that when you actually do make that official plan to move forward, that you have actually earned some interest on that. I've alluded to this already. The next step in this list, create a financial plan for what you want to do with your money. A critical piece here, because um, I often say to people on these things is like, don't go out and buy a boat immediately. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but this is a conversation that I had with my brother when this occurred with us. This plan should really align with your goals, your timeline, and your risks that you have for you. So, for example, in my goals on when this happened to me, I had a car that I had a automobile loan on. I also had some education debt that my wife and I were working down. And we also were trying to actually start saving some money for our first, you know, a child at the time. Now we have two, but actually get into those investments. Our goals there were to pay down that car loan, to help pay down some of that debt from the education, as well as understand that. Importantly, though, is understanding the timeline. That car loan, we wanted to get off the books right away. So that took priority as part of our plan, where the children's education, that took a little more time to actually grow and get there. And what that really allowed us to do is understand what funds then could we use, because I said we received cash. So the cash kind of went to that debt. The stocks that we received, and I'll get into this in a little bit, but the stocks actually had some more other implications to think about. So we allowed that to stay in and really kind of put that away for our children's education at that time. So again, understand your goals and your timeline of those goals, as well as the risks that you want to associate with those, to actually help create a better financial plan. So moving forward, the other couple of things, and actually probably one of the most important steps on here, is talk to a professional. I cannot weigh on this enough. No matter what you're doing, make sure you talk to a professional from a tax implication as well as a legal implication. And let me specifically kind of clarify there. So in my instance, we were inheriting basically some cash, some stocks, and this farm. And what we really had to be careful of was some of the estate taxes, as well as some of the inheritance taxes, which I didn't know that they actually exist. So just so people are aware here, so I can share some of that I learned, is that there is a federal estate tax. This is also known as the nicely worded death tax, that basically the estate itself is taxed in whole at the fair market value of the actual state. This isn't actually looking back, 35, 40 years to actually what the cost basis of. It's actually looking at today what the fair market value of that estate tax is. And that's what the federal government will tax you on. Now, there are exemptions on this. So for the biggest one is that the estate tax right now this year, 2024, the IRS exempts estates less than $13.6 million. So I think unless some of you are billionaires on this call, which, hi, nice to meet you, it might not necessarily impact you that much. But if you are over that $13.6 million, it's probably in the range of 40% tax rate. That estate is going to get taxed. There are deductions and some tax jujitsu, if you will, that can occur. But again, you need to speak to a tax professional to figure that out. It's not just at the federal level, though. It's also at the state level. There is estate estate tax, and there's 13 states that actually have an estate tax, and that includes the District of Columbia. Now, each one of these thresholds of these states vary, can be up, from 4 million up to the 13.6 million. That's in line with the actual federal law. As well as there's also some differences in terms of how you related to the actual estate owner. So for your relationship, whether you're a daughter, a son, or even a husband or a wife, or a grandson or a grandchild, each one of those has some differences amongst the states themselves. So please make sure that you are checking with your tax provider on that. The other important point here, there is in existence an inheritance tax. Now, the difference between an inheritance tax and an estate tax is that the estate tax, as I said, that gets taxed at the actual estate level, kind of up here. So the actual owner of that estate, before it's actually divided into whoever it's supposed to go to, it's taxed as a whole. The inheritance tax itself is actually taxed on the beneficiary. So it's not necessarily at the estate level, but to the individual people that it's actually taxed on. So if you actually get a large sum of cash, it's possible that you actually have to pay taxes on that inheritance. Now, the good news is that it's only in 6 states that have this inheritance tax. That's Iowa, Kentucky, Maryland. I'm going to use my cheat sheet over here. Nebraska, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Now, again, each one of those states, similar to the state estate tax, they have different levels that they're going to tax you on, as well as, again, those dependents, basically your relationship with the actual estate owner, as well as you as the beneficiary. So please make sure that you're talking to an accountant or a tax attorney to understand those implications. Now, in my case, the estate that we took was in Ohio, and thankfully that does not have an inheritance tax or an estate tax, and we didn't breach that $13.6 million. But what we did have to be careful of, which was the stock that we received. And I think any person that you're going to receive stock on, that, like for my grandparents that were born in the 20s, they might have had that stock for a very long time. So the cost basis of that stock is actually very low. So if you look at the value of the stock today, there's been a lot of appreciation, and that if we were just to simply cash out on that stock, the actual capital gains would be tremendous. So what we were advised to do is, again, back to that example of paying off my car debt, paying off the education debt, as well as then putting money or stocks away for our children. We were advised to take the stock, put that away for the children, and then depending on how that stock did, and depending on what year maybe we could actually cash out on those stocks, depends on, do we have any losses that we can actually help cover that capital gains tax that we would realize, or again, depending on how well that stock would do, should we actually keep it, let it appreciate, earn some of the dollars coming in off of those as dividends. So again, very important to talk to a tax professional to understand what each implication could be. Now, the other piece on here, and I've combined it, is the legal implications. Now, a lot of estates can be complicated, and outside of my immediate family, the 3 siblings that I had, or I have, we had 2 cousins that also were named in the estate, and 2 other family friends that were also named in the estate. But a lot of these estates can be layer upon layer upon layer. In my example, it was my grandfather's estate, and he passed away, and then my grandmother's estate, and then she rewrote it again, but just certain parts. We really needed an attorney to actually read through all of those and make sure that it made sense, and then everything was treated fairly. And what could have ended up as basically losing friends, not speaking to my cousins, we were able to really come to a conclusion by actually having all that information. But again, we needed that attorney to actually help us work through those, for us to actually keep those relationships in a working order. The next piece that I want to bring up to you is put yourself in the best financial position. So this is where I say, don't buy a boat. Slightly kidding on that, but this was a conversation that I had with my brother when we received this inheritance. He actually did go out and buy a boat. And I think I asked him how much that boat overall cost him. And he said, oh, definitely triple or quadruple of actually what he paid for it. But really the tone here is make sure that you're making the best financial position that, really is going to set you up well. So for example, this would be situations where you are looking to pay down large interest bearing debt that you have. So if people have credit card debt or like a high interest car payment that I had at the time, you want to make sure that you take care of those first. I also actually created an emergency fund, which I had never had before, but I was able to put away about 6 months of emergency fund to make sure that if anything were to happen to myself or my family, or if I was to lose a job, we could have that additional cushion. Now, I didn't run into this situation about putting yourself in a best financial position, but if you're reading a bunch of books out there about, hey, I'm inheriting some cash, what should I be careful of? Or even like, you hear those people about win the lottery, be careful of family and friends, because you have to make sure that, you're not necessarily going to invest in, let's say, your brother's, idea about, hey, I'm going to put a pickle on every straw, and that's going to be the new thing that people are going to be putting on drinks. I'm not going to go into that story, but I just want to make sure, be careful of what you're going to be spending your money. You want to put yourself in a very good financial position and try not to radically change your life when this occurs. Still make sure that you're living by those values and those goals that you have. Now, these are the first 5 important pieces. The last piece that I find is probably the missing piece that a lot of people don't actually take advantage of, is they don't execute the plan. So a lot of folks have gone through steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and it's great and it's all there. And sometimes they just put that plan to the side and they don't actually execute it. Now, me standing here or sitting here right now explaining to this, did I execute my plan all the way to its fullest? No, but I did the majority of pieces that I wanted to do. And as I reflected on, and even reflecting on actually putting this presentation together, when you actually walk through these steps, and make sure you're walking through these steps also asking about the feasibility of this. I have spent hours and days putting Excel spreadsheets together that list out, okay, if I save this much or invest this much and I bring our spending down to this much, I could be retired by 41. Absolutely. If you can do that and it's feasible for you, go ahead and do it. But make sure that you actually take a step back from these plans and what you're trying to achieve, so you can make sure that that plan is executable, that you're not going to run into situations where like, that's too hard or I can't do that. If that's the case and you're thinking through this, go back and make some tweaks to this plan. So maybe it's not going to be necessarily easy, but it's going to put you on the right foot in order to make sure that you can execute that plan. So I know this was quick. I'm more than happy to send out the slides for this if you reach out directly to me at rob@passiveinvesting.com. But really, if you're ever in this situation, please make sure that you're at least thinking about a framework like this. You don't have to step through this specifically. There are other examples. Amazon and whatever your favorite media outlet has, I'm sure has steps to think about when you're going through this. I tried to shed a little light on it from someone that's been through this, be it not an exuberant amount of money, but someone that had to go through this and kind of cause some strife with my siblings and some of those other people for, 3 to 4 years. But in the end, with working through this, it made a lot more sense. So I'm going to take a pause here. We do have a question that has come in. Why in your case, the stock cost basis not stepped up to the date of death as is normally the case? That is a great question, David. I'm not exactly sure on that specific area of why it didn't step up, but as informed by my actual accountant at that time, it was not going to step up. So now, again, this was quite some time ago when I was in my 20s, and so maybe I didn't do full research on that, but that is a great question. But again, making sure that you're thinking through these pieces and going through them. If there aren't any other questions, I want to wish all of you a very happy Tuesday. And again, if you do have any additional questions or want to find out more about passiveinvesting.com, you can reach out to Rob at passiveinvesting.com. Thank you, everyone, and take care.